So in many ways, I'm actually glad that I'm no longer a student because there are some experiences that I used to have as a student that were literally the most painful experience that I would ever encounter in my entire life. And one of those experiences was the feeling of falling behind, specifically the experience of backlog, where you've fallen so far behind that you have this huge backlog of material that you have to catch up with. Because this would be an experience for me in so many semesters. I would be coming off fresh off the holidays, so I was kind of in holiday mode. So week one of the semester, I would take it very, very chill. It's like, bro, it's week one, no problem. I can chill. I don't have to go to classes. There's no assessments. And then week two, it's week two, bro. Tutorials are just starting. I can basically take it chill. I don't have to do anything. Week three, I'm still in this holiday mode. Okay, I'm going to start thinking about beginning this semester. Okay. And week four is really where I get started in the semester. But by week four, I realize, holy cow, I'm 3 weeks behind, and the stuff that I'm behind in is actually pretty difficult. Some of these subjects in my engineering degree, actually the first 3 weeks were actually pretty difficult. Okay, I wish I didn't start so late. Okay, let's catch up. But by the time I would be caught up to week four would have happened, so I'm behind again. Okay, by the time I catch up again, okay, another week has come, and I'm behind again, and suddenly assessments are coming, and suddenly I'm drowning. And university just feels like this treadmill where you're constantly moving. You don't even have time to rest. You don't even have time to breathe. So how do we handle this? In this video, I'm going to tell you the tactics to actually learn faster so you can clear your backlog and finally get some breathing room, finally be able to rest. That's the first thing. And the second thing is how to deal with this immense stress that you encounter with backlog. All right, so first thing I want to talk about in backlog is how do we study faster? How do we clear this backlog very, very fast so, we can catch up and everything? So I want to talk about the subject I did, which is a subject I encountered the most biggest backlog. It was a subject back in 2022 in engineering called embedded system design. And it's one of those subjects, basically it was a subject where we played with robots and everything. So it was one of those subjects where the lecture material was actually not needed until the final exam. Because the class had workshops and everything, but the workshops we were just programming this robot, so we didn't actually need the lecture material. The workshops just used programming, C programming, which I already knew pretty well, so I didn't actually need the lecture material. So that being that type of subject, I reached exam season and I was 12 weeks behind. I had basically half a week or a week to capture up 12 weeks of material. So here's how I did it. I was not panicked because I knew how to handle backlog. So basically, the first tip I want to give you is that not every single section of the subject is weighted equally. So what this means is there are certain lectures, certain weeks in the subject that are going to be weighted more, worth more than other weeks. A very basic example is lecture one tends to be like very basic stuff. It's like, this is the teacher's name. This is the introduction to the subject. So it's pretty clear lecture one is worth almost nothing. But then often there's going to be one lecture that's super, super important. It's going to have the chunkiest marks on the exam. Or if you're doing an essay, it's going to be, worth the most. So what you need to do is you need to find those sections of the subject that are worth more, focus your energy on those, and find the areas of the subject that aren't actually assessed and don't focus on those areas. So the subject is kind of like, if you can consider week 1 to week 12, it's kind of like a graph where some lectures are worth more, some are worth less. So if you focus your energy on those high worth areas, I promise you can learn about 4 times faster. So how do we find these areas? Well, basically the tactic to do is to actually work in the reverse to how most students work. So how most students work and how I always work at the beginning of a semester, how I used to always work, is when you would have a lot of time in the semester, you would often, start by learning the lectures. I'm going to learn week 1, then week 2, then week 3. Or I'm going to go to the textbook, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You would learn all the material first. And then after you've learned the material, that's when you begin your assignments. That's when you begin writing your essays. That's when you begin doing past paper questions. That's when you begin doing questions. The tactic I want to give you is to actually work in the reverse. So before you've even looked at the lecture material, before you've even looked at the textbook, before you even know what the subject is about, begin doing your assessments, begin doing past papers. So I'm going to use the example of past papers here. Let's say maths. Many students, what they'll do in maths is they'll learn, all 12 weeks of material, they'll take notes, they'll make sure they understand it very, very well, and then they'll jump into past paper questions. What I'm telling you to do is to start with past paper questions and then go to the material. So you might think, okay, but how can I do the questions? How can I do the assignment if I don't even know the material? I'll go through that in a second, but there are basically 3 advantages why doing it in this order is actually better. Okay, basically the first reason is because when you look at the assignment, when you look at the past papers, it literally tells you which lectures are worth more. Because often, at least in engineering, in maths, in many of those subjects, there will often be one question that's pretty much on every single year, or several kinds of questions that are pretty much on every single year that are only like one lecture. There was always that one lecture that was worth like 20% of the entire subject. Okay, it's pretty clear you want to direct your attention on that lecture. That lecture will give you a huge return on your time. And also what you'll discover is there's going to be some lectures that aren't even assessed. Like the most extreme, I did this subject called declarative programming. The last 6 weeks of the subject weren't even assessed. And because I did this tactic, I could skip that last 6 weeks of the subject while everyone else in my class studied those last 6 weeks. And they ended up wasting a ton of their time. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because you'll realize the areas of the subject that aren't even assessed. But the third reason is you actually learn better. You learn the lectures better. You learn the textbook better when you apply what you're learning. So there's this, like I've seen this online, there's this learning pyramid where they tell you different ways of learning and how effective they are. Learning by listening, learning by watching was like at the bottom. It was like 10%, 20% retention. I don't know how accurate this is, by the way. This is just something I saw, and it's pretty accurate in my own experience. But learning by doing, learning by practicing was like 90% retention. It was all the way up the top. So basically what this means is when you use the lecture material, when you use the textbook material to answer questions, you learn it better. So what do I mean by that exactly? So like I said, how are you going to do the questions? How are you going to do the assessments if you haven't even learned the lecture material? Well, I think of it like fixing your car. So you've got a car manual, right? You don't just sit there and study the car manual, like write notes on every single page of the car manual and then go out there and try to fix your car. If you do that, you're going to be completely stuck. Instead, what you want to do is you want to go out there to your car and just try fixing it. Like you open up the hood or whatever, you try to like mix some stuff, fix some stuff. And whenever you run into a problem, then you go to the manual and you search up the solution. And when you do that, you learn a lot better because you're learning to solve a problem. When you learn to solve a problem, you learn it that much better. Let me give you an example. When I first started making YouTube videos, I sucked. I sucked at talking to camera. I was absolutely horrible. But I didn't actually start making YouTube videos for 1 year. So for 1 year, I wanted to make YouTube videos. I wanted to post videos, but I didn't. And what I did with that time was I spent hours a day watching content on how to make good videos. So I was spending literally hundreds of hours learning how to make really good videos, how to talk to camera perfectly, how to make videos that people want to watch. Hundreds of hours of watching that stuff. And a year later, when I got to recording my first YouTube video, I still sucked. I was still horrible on camera because just because you're learning something, it doesn't mean you can apply it. If you watch 100 hours of tennis videos and you actually go out there onto the tennis court and try to serve a ball, I guarantee you're going to miss. You're going to have a terrible serve because the only way to learn is to actually get direct experience. This book, Ultra Learning, talks about the principle of directness, where you actually have to go out there and get direct experience. So that's what I find with these subjects. Often I will learn an entire chapter. I will literally memorize every line of the chapter. I'll know it perfectly. But when I'll actually go to do a question, I'll realize that I can't actually retrieve the information that I learned in that chapter. So instead, the better approach is to just use the information as you need it. Just like the car manual. So what I did with my YouTube channel was I just started making videos. I would make 5 videos and I made more progress just making 5 videos than I did watching like 100 hours of content. And then, every now and then I would run into a problem, and whenever I would run into a problem, I would go learn. For example, I don't know how to make a good hook in my videos. So I would go research how to make a good hook, the psychology of hooks. And then I would apply that information to making hooks. And I would learn that information much better because I was actually applying it and I was using it to solve problems. Your brain learns better when you use the information to actually solve problems. So here's how you practically do it. Maybe you go to your past paper and you come across a question on trigonometry. Okay, this question is on the cosine rule. Well, go research, learn about the cosine rule, and then attempt the question. When that information is fresh in your mind, when you've just learned it, and then you immediately go and apply it, you will learn it that much better. So here's basically the approach I used to use. I used to use like one past paper and I would kind of go through the questions and I would learn just enough to do each question. And then I would go into the second past paper and I would learn just enough to do each question. But I would realize that actually I could do a lot of those questions already because I had learned it from the first past paper. And then I would go into the third past paper and I would learn just enough to do each question. And then I would realize that I would actually know even more because I had already done 2 past papers, and repeat and repeat and repeat. So again, it's like the analogy of going onto the tennis court, trying to hit the tennis ball 10 times, and then watching a video, how to serve a tennis ball. Okay, I gotta pronate my wrist or something. And then trying to pronate your wrist for a while. Okay, it's still not working. I watch a video. I gotta use my legs. Okay, trying to use your legs. Watching and then learning, watching, then learning. So doing questions, learning, doing questions, learning. And you will find that you don't cover a lot of the subject because you probably didn't need a lot of that material. Even within a given lecture, there's probably a bunch of sections in the lecture you don't actually need. Like in maths, tends to be a lot of these really complicated proofs that you don't actually have to use them. And you might think like the maths nerds out there might be like, but it's good to know those proofs to, increase your knowledge or whatever. But often, I don't know how to explain this, but often the maths subject, at least this was the case in engineering, the maths subject was so advanced that it was basically impossible to understand the proof unless you had outside knowledge on the subject anyway. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically what it means is it was basically unlearnable. You couldn't even learn that stuff in the first place without, advanced knowledge. So the point I'm trying to make here is you will eventually learn that source material, by the way. You keep doing this, and you can do it for your assignments, for your essays, by the way, as well. You will eventually learn the material. And so get really good at spotting patterns and just keep using your source material. I'm going to tell you a secret. Basically, in university, I actually almost never took notes. I almost didn't take a single note in university. Like I remember this one time in biology in high school. I took 0 notes for biology, right? And so my notebook was completely empty. I just had a bunch of doodles in my notebook. Like I just draw random stuff when I'm bored in class. And so the teacher, he came around and he collected everyone's notebooks because he was going to assess our notes. And I remember thinking like, oh shit, I didn't write any notes. I'm screwed. And the teacher literally screamed at me. He got so mad at me because this was like a year into biology and I hadn't taken a single note. And he was furious at me. But the thing is, I ended up doing well in biology anyway. I'm a nerd. And so, I didn't need to take notes because I used the source material as my notes. Lecture notes are often pretty good that you can use them directly to learn your stuff. Now, you can take notes if you want. I'm not saying don't take notes, but my personal tactic is to use the source material and really get to know it really, really well. Like get to the point where literally you're like, okay, this question, that's lecture 14, chapter 5, subsection 2 on the, on the Pythagorean theorem or whatever. Get to the point where you can just source the source material very, very easily. That's the point I like to get to. All right, so work in reverse. That's the first thing. Okay, the second thing is how do we deal with this feeling of drowning? Because, okay, we've got the strategy, but when we actually sit down to study, here's the problem. We're so far behind that it feels so uncomfortable. let's say we're like 7 weeks behind in the subject. If we were to sit down right now in the library and lock in for 2 hours, we're barely gonna make a dent in our backlog. 2 hours later, we're barely gonna make a dent. So our brain tells us, no, bro, this is a waste of time. 2 hours, we're not even gonna make a dent. This is useless. Let's just go watch Netflix. So that's the problem. Any study session feels like you're not even making any progress towards, clearing that backlog. It's like having the goal of clearing the entire Pacific Ocean and walking to the beach with a cup. Every scoop you make is gonna, sorry for the bad analogy, but it's gonna seem completely useless every scoop you're making. It's like when you sit down to study for 2 hours, it feels like you're taking a scoop of the Pacific Ocean or something. So because of that, we feel so stressed. We feel like this is a waste of time. And often what will happen is we'll just get randomly tired. Like we'll sit down, we'll open up the textbook and suddenly we'll feel so sleepy out of nowhere. And it's because our brain is signaling to us, bro, this is a waste of time. You're wasting your energy. Your brain literally makes you tired as a way to protect you from wasting your energy. It's true. Go watch my video, How to Study When You're Tired. I don't think I've released it yet. I'm gonna record it today actually, but I'm gonna go more in depth on that. But what's more, often, like I said, I would begin studying and I would realize I was so far behind. This subject was harder than I thought, and my mind would spiral out of control into these negative loops. You can't focus. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, your mind is in the future, worrying about how you're going to fail, how you're going to disappoint your parents who are paying for your tuition, or it's in the past, thinking about how you always do this, how you always mess up. Last time you were in backlog, you failed. So your mind's pulling you to the past and the future. It can't stay present with the material. It can't learn. So you go to your coping mechanisms. You go to Netflix. You go wasting time because you're running away from this discomfort. So how do we handle this? How do we keep ourselves calm? How do we keep ourselves balanced? So the answer is something called chunking. Basically, what you need to understand is the subject is, let's say, 1,000 steps. The subject is 1,000 steps. Step 1, this section of this lecture. Step 2, this section of this lecture. Step 3, this section of this lecture. So it doesn't matter whether you were doing this subject from week 1 or whether you were doing it from the time of this backlog. Either way, the subject is 1,000 steps. So the solution is to actually change your perspective here. You have to realize that either way, you've got to take 1,000 steps. And the thing is, when you're taking the first step and you're focused on the next step and the next step and you're focused on the whole mountain, you get stuck. So let's say, for example, you're climbing a mountain. When you're climbing a mountain, it's actually very, very easy. You just take a step. Climbing a mountain is literally just involves taking a step. But the thing is, you got to do it 10,000 times. So when you're taking a step, take a step. Don't look at the huge, massive mountain in front of you. Just focus on one step at a time. Because the problem is we take the first step and we're like, 1,000 steps to go. Oh my God, it's so high, it's so high. Then we take the next step. 1,000 steps to go. I've barely made any progress. Oh my God. We're worrying about the next steps. Just focus on the current step you're on. So instead of seeing the backlog as this massive, massive, massive onslaught of pain until you get the relief of finally catching up, think of it as a chain of wins. Step 1 is a win. Step 2 is a win. Step 3 is a win. Step 4 is a win. And if every time, basically this is what chunking is. You chunk the material into manageable sizes. So maybe day 1 you do this past paper. Day 2 you do this past paper. Day 3 you do this past paper. And you start stacking wins. Because there's this quote I really like. The biggest motivator is progress. So when you clearly, and there's another concept I want to give you called the winner effect. Basically, what they found is if a team won in a sport, they're more likely to win the next game because they've got that hype, they've got that momentum, they've got that energy bringing them into the next game. They feel more confident, they feel more capable. So if you chunk up your material and you count the wins instead, that's going to build momentum. That's going to make you propelled to make progress, to motivate you. And it's going to get you into that momentum. The next tip I want to give you, by the way, is a big problem with backlog is we'll feel like we always need to be working. We feel like, I've always got to work. I've always got to work. If we relax, we feel guilty. Now, there's actually 2 kinds of relaxation that I want to talk about. The first one is the kind of relaxation where we're avoiding pain. You know, maybe we've just woken up and we know we need to start studying, but we scroll on our phone. That's not real relaxation. That is just us avoiding the pain of starting. But the other kind of relaxation, which is completely necessary, is, for example, in the middle of the day, when we intentionally rest our brains from studying. So the next tip I want to give you is intentionally put rest periods throughout the day and rest guilt-free. Really allow your brain to recover and everything. So for example, you might every day put in a block where you exercise. And when you're exercising, you're focused on exercising. You're not thinking about, oh, I have to study, I have to study. And that will make the backlog a lot more manageable. So break it up into chunks. And the other thing is prioritize these chunks. So if you've got one exam that's closer than everything else, work on that for a couple chunks. Work on that for a few days. Get into the momentum of that. And then as your priorities shift, start going on to other things. So I would always do the exam that was the most difficult, the closest first. And when I started to actually get some competence in that, then I would switch to something else. And then I would get competence in that thing and I would switch to something else. And then competence in that and then switch and switch and switch and switch. And the final tip I want to give you here, by the way, is yes, dealing with backlog is uncomfortable. It's painful. It's not fun. But the problem is we put up resistance to this and it makes it more difficult. I like to think of it as maybe a baby crying on an airplane. So if you've ever been on an airplane and a baby has started crying for multiple hours, you know how painful it is. Literally, it's like the baby's crying and you're trying to watch a movie, you're trying to read, and you just hear like, wah, 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 wah. And the baby's literally crying in the background. Here's the thing, the baby crying is painful. We can't deny that. But actually, what makes the baby crying even more painful is the fact that we put up resistance against it. So the baby's crying, okay, it's painful. But for hours, we're like, oh my God, that's so painful. Make the baby stop. Please, I just want to watch my movie. Make the baby stop. But the weird thing is this thing called acceptance. If you just accept, okay, there's a baby crying here. It's uncomfortable, but I'm just going to let it be. I'm just going to let the baby be there. I'm not going to let it ruin my peace. It's kind of like background music. It cuts the pain of the baby crying by at least 50%. What makes it more painful is that we resist it constantly. We fight back. We get so mad with ourselves. We get mad at the baby. Drop that resistance and you will find that the baby crying is a lot less painful. It's exactly like this scenario. For example, if I was dealing with backlog, I would feel like intense tightness in my chest. I would feel like heat in my face. It would feel so uncomfortable in my body. But what if we just accepted that and we let it be there? And we understood, okay, backlog is uncomfortable, but there's no point resisting it. Because often when we're dealing with backlog, we're feeling resistance. We just constantly keep dreaming about when the semester is over. We just look forward to it. We regret our decisions. So we're constantly in the past regretting our decisions. We're constantly in the future wishing the semester was over. This resistance just makes the backlog experience much more painful. What if we dropped that resistance, but just did it anyway? We saw that, experience of feeling the pain as the baby crying. We just accepted, okay, it's there. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's just accept this moment and let's do it. Just accepting it will take away a lot of the pain, a lot of the resistance to it. So that's it. Hope that video helped. Good luck with your backlog. And first link in the description, my inner circle community. I can literally hear out your situation and give you the exact steps you need to begin to make studying effortless and actually enjoyable, because that's what we've helped a ton of students do this semester. So I guarantee within 14 days, if you join, studying will start to become a lot more effortless, a lot more enjoyable. And if you're dealing with backlog, you can come tell us your situation and we will literally help you save time if you need that help. But otherwise, see you later.